Why did no one notice how steady her hands were when she stepped forward? The sun had already burned the morning haze off the road, heat rising in thin distortions from the asphalt when she stopped at the edge of the checkpoint. She looked too young to be there. 17, maybe. Small frame, no weapon visible, no escort. Just a worn jacket zipped halfway up and an old badge resting in her palm, edges smoothed by time rather than carelessness. The officer barely glanced at it before laughing. Not cruelly, casually. The kind of laugh that comes from certainty, the certainty that you're right, that the system works, that you've seen every trick already. "This isn't active," he said, turning it over with 2 fingers like a novelty coin. "Where'd you find this? Garage sale." A few others smiled. Someone leaned back in the booth, enjoying the moment. The gate stayed locked. Red lights pulsed steadily. Level 5 access didn't bend for teenagers with antiques. She didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't even tighten her jaw. Her eyes lifted once not to his face but to the radio on his shoulder, and then she waited. Being ignored wasn't new to her. Neither was restraint. The officer waved her aside with mock politeness, pointing down the road toward civilian processing. "Visitor office can help you," he said. 2 miles that way." Laughter rippled softly. Someone mimed dusting off old relics. Another joked about museums. She stayed where she was. Perfect posture, no fidgeting, no nerves, just stillness. Inside her chest, something tightened, not fear but memory. Long nights listening to briefings she wasn't supposed to attend. Years of being told to wait, to observe, to endure quietly. Training that didn't reward impatience. Training that punished ego. She let her gaze drift, cataloging without starring. Camera placement, backup generator, fiber junction, emergency override panel hidden behind weathered paint, 3-second delay in the visual feed. 17 vulnerabilities. She named none of them. The officer turned his back on her. Conversation resumed. Weekend plans, coffee, ordinary life. That was when she spoke, just once. "You might want to listen." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He scoffed and switched radio channels mid-sentence. Static flared, then silence. At first irritation, then confusion, then realization. Every radio went dead. Every system froze. The gate stalled. Hydraulics hissed and stopped. Error codes bled across screens. Hands moved to weapons. Training kicked in. He turned toward her, his smile gone. "What did you do?" She didn't answer. She stepped forward slowly and placed the badge on the scanner again. This time, the system didn't reject it. It locked hard. A clearance banner flashed, gone in a blink, but long enough to be seen. Omega. The officer felt something sink in his stomach that no training ever prepared him for. Then one radio came back to life. His. "Checkpoint 7, a calm voice said. "Why is she still outside?" The officer swallowed. The judgment had already been made. Why did the silence feel heavier than the threat? As the gate opened with deliberate slowness, she walked through without looking at anyone. Not in defiance, not in triumph, just forward because that had always been the direction. Inside the perimeter, the noise of the base returned all at once. Radios alive, engines moving, orders flowing, normality reasserting itself like nothing had happened. But something had. The officer stood frozen long after she passed, replaying the moment he'd laughed. The badge, the girl, the way she hadn't defended herself. That restraint unsettled him more than any weapon could have. Across the base, she moved unescorted, unchallenged. Every door opened. Every system recognized her presence without announcing it. She felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders, responsibility without acknowledgement. She'd been here before, other bases, other checkpoints, other assumptions. Inside a secured hangar, she stopped. For the first time that morning, she exhaled fully. The mission wasn't here. This was just a door, one of many. Her real work waited beyond the runway, beyond borders, beyond comfort. She thought briefly of her mother, who still thought she was attending a specialized academy overseas, of the lie that protected them both. Being proud was dangerous, being visible was worse. A briefing room door slid open. Inside, a handful of senior personnel stood when she entered, not formally, not ceremonially, but instinctively. No one asked for her name. They asked if she was ready. She nodded, because doubt was a luxury she'd shed years ago. Why did the cockpit feel quieter than the checkpoint? The aircraft hummed beneath her, familiar and grounding. Controls responded like old friends. She ran through checks methodically, each movement precise, unhurried. Flying had always been her refuge. Up here, age didn't matter, gender didn't matter, only skill, only discipline. As the jet lifted off, the ground fell away, along with the memory of laughter at the gate. But not the lesson. She wasn't angry. Anger burned fuel too fast. She was focused. The mission briefing replayed in her mind. Target area, extraction window, variables, risks. One mistake could cascade. She felt the familiar edge of anxiety, not fear, but awareness. The knowledge that things could go wrong despite perfection. That was the weight she carried. Over hostile territory, she adjusted course, threading between detection zones with practiced ease. On the ground below, a team waited pinned, running out of time. She descended into danger without fanfare. Because dignity didn't need applause, it needed resolve. Why did she hesitate when the shot presented itself? Through the scope, the world narrowed, breath slowed, finger rested against the trigger. The target moved unpredictably, civilians nearby, wind shifting. This was where myths talked about instinct, reality talked about restraint. She waited. A second too long, some would say. But she'd learned early that patience saved more lives than speed. When the moment came, it was clean, singular, final. No celebration, just confirmation. The extraction unfolded under pressure, but discipline held. She guided them out, eyes scanning until the last silhouette cleared the zone. Only then did she allow herself a breath. Pride flickered, quickly suppressed. There would be no headlines, no commendations delivered publicly, just a quiet log entry and another task completed. That was the bargain she'd accepted. That was the cost of being trusted with too much too early. Why did the checkpoint officer recognize her walk on the return? Weeks later, the same road, same gate, same sun. This time the officer snapped to attention before she reached him, not because of recognition software, because of memory. She handed over the same badge. He scanned it without comment. The gate opened immediately. As she passed, he spoke softly. "I'm sorry," he said. She paused just briefly and met his eyes. Not with judgment, with understanding. Then she continued on. Because redemption wasn't about humiliation, it was about learning. Why did no one ever hear her story? Because stories like hers didn't belong to crowds. They lived in quiet policy changes, in revised training manuals, in officers who verified before dismissing. She returned to anonymity without bitterness, without regret. Strength, she'd learned, didn't announce itself. It acted. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person could do was stand still, say nothing, and let the truth arrive on its own. Why did the air inside the perimeter feel heavier than the silence she'd left behind? The moment the gate sealed shut behind her, the base resumed its rhythm as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Engines roared, radios chattered, boots struck concrete with practiced urgency. To everyone else, it was just another morning on a secure installation, another shift, another checklist, another day governed by routine. But for her, crossing that threshold always carried weight. She walked alone down the access road, her footsteps measured, unhurried. No escort flanked her. No one demanded identification again. Systems recognized her presence without ceremony, doors unlocking milliseconds before her hand reached them, cameras adjusting their angles as she passed. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't fear. It was compliance, pure, automated obedience to authority that existed quietly above human judgment. That kind of power never felt good. Inside her chest, something tight and familiar pressed against her ribs. Not triumph, not relief, responsibility, the kind that never let go even when the mission hadn't started yet. She passed a row of young soldiers waiting near a transport truck. They glanced at her, curious but restrained, sensing, without understanding, that she didn't belong to their hierarchy. One of them straightened unconsciously. Another lowered his voice mid-sentence. None of them asked who she was. Training had taught them that some questions carried consequences. She remembered being their age, younger even, standing on another base halfway across the world, wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit yet, listening to men twice her age debate whether she should even be in the room. She learned early that proving yourself loudly only hardened resistance. Silence, when paired with competence, did far more damage. The hangar doors slid open as she approached, hydraulic motors whining softly. Inside, the aircraft waited sleek, restrained, deadly in a way that didn't need decoration. She paused just inside the threshold, letting the smell of fuel and cold metal ground her. This space was honest. Machines didn't underestimate you. They responded to how well you understood them. A technician looked up from a console, startled for half a second before his expression smoothed into professional neutrality. "Systems are green," he said, not asking her name. He didn't need it. The clearance attached to her presence had already updated his task list. She nodded once in acknowledgement and moved toward the aircraft, running a hand lightly along the fuselage as she passed. The metal was cool under her fingers, solid, reliable. She preferred that to people. As she climbed into the cockpit, the outside world narrowed. The canopy closed with a soft, sealing thud, muting the noise of the hangar. For a brief moment, there was just her breath, the low hum of power, and the familiar layout of instruments waiting for her touch. Here, she allowed herself something she never did at checkpoints or briefings. She thought. The officer's laugh replayed in her mind, not sharply, not bitterly, but with clarity. She didn't hate him for it. Hatred wasted energy. What stayed with her was the ease of it, how naturally dismissal came when someone didn't fit expectation. She built her entire life around surviving that reflex. The engine spooled up as she completed pre-flight checks, her movements precise, economical. Every switch had a reason. Every confirmation mattered. She'd learned discipline long before the military formalized it for her, learned it in places where mistakes weren't corrected with reprimands, but with consequences that didn't fade. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, she caught sight of the checkpoint tower in the distance. Tiny from here, insignificant, even, yet the memory of standing outside it lingered like an afterimage. Authority had failed there, not because of malice but because of assumption. That lesson mattered. The tower cleared her for takeoff without delay. No hesitation, no verification beyond what the system had already provided. She advanced the throttle smoothly, feeling the familiar push as speed built beneath her. When the wheels left the ground, something inside her loosened just a fraction. Up here no one laughed. The sky opened around her, vast and indifferent. She climbed steadily, banking away from the base as it shrank below. Her route took her east, then north, threading between invisible lines drawn by radar coverage and geopolitical agreements that changed faster than most people realized. She adjusted her course slightly, compensating for crosswinds. Her breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm of flight. This was where she felt most herself, not powerful, not exceptional, just aligned. The mission briefing echoed back into her thoughts, careful and restrained in its language. A team had gone dark during an extraction attempt. No explosions, no dramatic last stand, just a breakdown in communication and a narrowing window that didn't care about intentions. They needed eyes, precision, someone who could operate without escalating the situation. They'd called her because she didn't rush. As the aircraft settled into cruising altitude, her mind drifted, not to the mission itself, but to the spaces between moments, to the years that had led her here. She remembered the first time someone had told her she was too young, too small, too quiet. She believed them then briefly, long enough to feel the sting of it, long enough to decide she would never give anyone that leverage again. Training had come in fragments, some official, some less so. Mentors who never signed paperwork, instructors who taught her what not to write down, people who saw potential not as something to praise but something to protect. She learned to compartmentalize early, school by day, simulations by night, lessons that never came with reassurance, just expectations. Failure was never punished with anger. It was corrected with repetition. That stayed with her. A warning indicator blinked softly on the panel, nothing serious. She adjusted a setting, acknowledging it without irritation. Machines spoke honestly if you listened. People rarely did. As she crossed into contested airspace, her posture shifted subtly. Focus sharpened. The world narrowed again, not to fear but to parameters, altitude, speed, timing, variables that could be managed. Her pulse quickened, not from adrenaline but anticipation. The mission wasn't dangerous yet. That came later. This was the calm before decisions mattered. She checked the clock. The extraction window was closing faster than planned. Somewhere on the ground, people were waiting, tired, probably angry, maybe scared. She didn't imagine their faces. That made hesitation easier later when it counted. She adjusted her descent profile, slipping lower, letting terrain mask her approach. The aircraft responded beautifully, hugging the invisible contours she'd memorized long before takeoff. As the land rose to meet her, a familiar tension settled in her chest. Determination layered over anxiety, not fear of failure, fear of letting others down. That had always been her weakest point. She thought briefly of her mother, of phone calls kept deliberately vague, of stories edited for safety, of a life that ran parallel to this one, unaware of how close danger sometimes came. That was the sacrifice no one applauded. A coded signal flashed across her display. The team was alive, mobile, pressured. She acknowledged it with a quick transmission and adjusted course again, lining up for the next phase. There would be no room for doubt now. As the ground details sharpened beneath her, she felt the last traces of the checkpoint fade. The laughter, the silence, the lesson. Those things belonged to another place. Here, what mattered was what came next. And she was ready. Why did her hands steady even more when everything below her began to unravel? The terrain rose fast now, details sharpening into meaning. What had been abstract contours on a screen resolved into broken roads, scorched earth, scattered structures that told quiet stories of people who no longer trusted the sky. She brought the aircraft lower, slower, letting the landscape swallow her silhouette. The machine responded with a confidence she'd earned through repetition, not luck. This was the point where hesitation became dangerous. A signal pulsed again on her display, faint, compressed, deliberately brief. They were conserving power, conserving hope. She decoded it automatically, mapping their movement in her mind. They were alive but barely ahead of the pressure closing in. She adjusted her approach vector and felt that familiar tightening behind her sternum. Not panic, responsibility. She'd been here before, different country, different year, same weight. Back then she'd rushed. Back then people had paid for it. The memory surfaced uninvited, sand in her mouth, her hands shaking afterward, a voice in her ear reminding her that speed without judgment was just noise. She'd been younger then. Not much, but enough to matter. Old enough to learn that pride could be as lethal as fear. Her breathing slowed again, deliberate. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The cockpit felt smaller as her focus narrowed, but her thoughts were clear. This was where all the training converged, not in explosions or speeches, but in the quiet act of choosing correctly when no one could correct you. A warning tone chimed softly, radar sweep, distant, not locked yet. She dipped lower, letting a ridge line mask her descent. The aircraft skimmed the edge of physics, close enough to remind her that confidence had limits. She respected that boundary. She always had. Below, a plume of dust marked movement, too fast for civilians, too coordinated for coincidence. She tracked it without emotion, logging distance and trajectory. Somewhere out there, someone else was making decisions that would intersect with hers. They always did. Her mind flicked briefly to the checkpoint officer again, not as a person, but as a symbol. How easily people mistook calm for weakness. How often silence was interpreted as ignorance. Out here, silence was survival. She eased the aircraft into a holding pattern just beyond visual range, careful not to linger. Time stretched in strange ways at moments like this. Seconds felt thick, heavy. Each one demanded justification. The ground team's next transmission came through in fragments. One of them was injured, mobility compromised, morale strained. They hadn't said it outright, but she heard it anyway. She always did. Her jaw tightened. Determination settled in deeper, overriding the flicker of anxiety that tried to surface. This wasn't about proving anything. It never was. It was about getting people home. She began her descent for real now, committing to a line that would expose her briefly but decisively. There would be no second pass, not without escalating the situation beyond recovery. As the aircraft slipped below the ridge, the world opened violently. Heat signatures flared. Structures rushed toward her vision. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but it stayed contained, harnessed. Emotion acknowledged, then disciplined. Her targeting systems came alive, data flowing in precise overlays. She filtered ruthlessly, discarding noise, isolating intent. One cluster stood out, too organized, too deliberate. They weren't there by accident. Her finger rested near the trigger, pressure featherlight. This was the moment stories loved to dramatize, the instant where instinct supposedly took over. In reality, it was restraint that mattered. She watched, counted, waited. A civilian figure moved into frame. Then another, the cluster shifted, the line blurred, a clean shot evaporated. Her heart rate spiked, not with fear but frustration. This was the kind of moment that tested character. The shot was almost there, almost good enough, almost justifiable. Almost wasn't acceptable. She pulled back slightly, breaking line of sight. A risk, a necessary one. The radio crackled with urgency from the ground. They didn't know what she could see. They only knew time was running out. She didn't respond immediately. Silence again, not neglect but calculation. She repositioned, angling for elevation, letting shadows work for her. The aircraft felt heavier now, burdened by choice rather than fuel. She adjusted, recalibrated, and brought the systems back online. The cluster reappeared, cleaner this time, isolated. No civilians in the immediate frame, wind steady, range optimal. Her breath slowed until it barely registered. This was the moment she'd been trained for. Not the shot itself, but the decision to take it. She squeezed. The recoil was subtle, controlled. The effect below was immediate and contained. No chaos, no spectacle, just a sudden absence where threat had been. She didn't linger to watch. Confirmation came through sensors, not emotion. Almost immediately, movement on the ground shifted. Confusion rippled through the hostile elements. The pressure on the team eased just enough. She transmitted a single word: move. They did. As she pulled away, climbing hard to clear the zone, the delayed weight of the decision pressed in. Pride flickered, then faded. There was no room for it yet. There never was. The aircraft climbed back into safer air, alarms quieting, systems stabilizing. Her hands, steady as ever, guided it without tremor. Only then did she feel it, the brief hollow space after action, the place where doubt liked to live if you let it. She didn't. Instead, she focused on the extraction timeline, already adjusting for contingencies. The mission wasn't over. It rarely ended where people thought it did. Below her, the ground team moved with renewed urgency. Above her, the sky remained indifferent. And inside her, the quiet resolve that had carried her through a mocked checkpoint now carried her through something far more consequential. Because being underestimated had taught her something essential. Silence wasn't absence. It was control. Why did the quiet after the shot feel more dangerous than the chaos before it? The aircraft climbed hard, banking away from the valley as if the ground itself might reach up and grab her. The engines roared just enough to remind her of their limits, then settled back into a disciplined hum. Below, the terrain blurred again into abstraction. Lines, shadows, heat signatures that meant less now than they had moments earlier. The immediate threat was gone. That didn't mean the danger was. Her eyes flicked across the instruments, confirming what she already felt through the frame of the cockpit. Systems stable, fuel within margins. No pursuit yet, the kind of calm that invited complacency if you let it. She didn't. Experience had taught her that the moments after action were when mistakes slipped in, when your body wanted to exhale, to claim victory prematurely. She forced herself to stay present, hands light on the controls, mind scanning ahead rather than replaying what had just happened. The radio crackled again, this time clearer. The ground team was moving, faster now, coordinated. Pain and exhaustion still threaded through their voices, but something else had crept in alongside it. Relief, hope, dangerous emotions if they went unchecked. "Hold discipline," she said, voice steady, deliberately uncelebratory. "You're not clear yet." They acknowledged, professionalism reasserting itself. She respected that. Survival depended on it. As she circled at a safe distance, providing overwatch, the weight of what she'd done finally pressed closer. Not guilt, not regret, accountability. The kind that didn't announce itself with drama, but with quiet questions you carried alone. She'd taken a life again. No matter how justified, how necessary, that truth never softened. Anyone who said it did was lying, or broken in ways that scared her more than fear ever could. Her gaze drifted briefly to the horizon, where heat shimmered and the sky met land in a harsh, unforgiving line. She thought of the first time she'd been told that distance made these decisions easier, that altitude created detachment. It never had. The extraction zone came into view on her secondary display, a narrow strip carved out of necessity rather than design. The team converged there in staggered movement, one of them limping, another supporting him without slowing their pace. She tracked them continuously, adjusting her orbit to keep threats in sight. A new heat bloom flared at the edge of the sensor range. Vehicles, too fast, too purposeful. Her jaw tightened, so much for clean exits. She keyed the mic again, tone sharpening just slightly. "You've got movement inbound. 3 vehicles. Stay low, don't bunch up." There was a pause on the line, a beat where she could hear the strain in their breathing. Then acknowledgement. No panic, just acceptance. She shifted the aircraft's position, putting herself between the approaching threat and the team's escape route. This was the part that never made it into after-action summaries. The part where you balance deterrence against escalation, knowing that one wrong move could spiral outward beyond anyone's control. Her targeting systems locked and released in rapid cycles as she evaluated options. A warning shot might scatter them or provoke them. A direct hit would stop them, but at a cost that rippled far beyond this valley. She waited. Seconds stretched. The vehicle slowed, uncertain now. They felt the absence earlier, even if they didn't know why. Someone important hadn't answered their call. Someone who had been leading them was suddenly gone. Confusion was a fragile thing. Handle it wrong, and it hardened into resolve. She made a choice, not to fire but to reveal herself just enough. The aircraft dipped into visibility for a heartbeat, sunlight glinting off metal unmistakable in silhouette. A presence, a warning, not aggressive, definitive. The vehicles braked hard, dust billowed. One turned away, then another. The third hesitated longest before following. She exhaled slowly, not in relief, but release of tension she'd been holding since the shot. "Move now," she said to the team. "Windows open." They didn't waste it. Minutes later, the extraction was complete. The team lifted out, disappearing into the distance, their signal fading to nothing as they crossed into safer airspace. She watched until the last confirmation came through, then adjusted course to follow her own exit plan. Only then did the fatigue creep in, not physical, but emotional. The kind that settled behind the eyes and made you aware of every decision you, stacked on top of the last. She let herself feel it briefly, not to dwell, just to acknowledge. On the long flight back, with the sky empty and the radio quiet, memories surfaced unbidden. The checkpoint again, the officer's laugh, the way his confidence had cracked when systems failed him. She wondered if he'd replay that moment the way she replayed this one, if it would change the way he looked at the next person who didn't fit expectation. Change, she knew, was never guaranteed. But sometimes impact was enough. As the base came back into view, lights winking on in the approaching dusk, she felt the familiar tightening return. Coming home was its own kind of challenge. The return to normality after inhabiting a space where decisions carried such immediate weight. She touched down smoothly, the aircraft rolling to a controlled stop. The hangar doors opened as if they'd been waiting for her alone. When the canopy lifted, the cool air rushed in, sharp and grounding. She stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary, hands resting on her thighs, eyes closed. Broken, maybe, not in pieces, but in the way stone breaks under pressure. Changed, reshaped. She climbed down without ceremony, handed off the aircraft and walked away before anyone could speak to her. There would be debriefs later, reports, quiet acknowledgments logged where they wouldn't be seen. For now, she needed distance. Because missions ended. Consequences didn't. You said. 5. ChatGPT said. Why did she feel more exposed walking back onto the base than she ever had in the air? The pavement was still warm from the day when she crossed the flight line, boots striking concrete with a rhythm that felt louder than it should have. The base was settling into evening, that strange in-between hour where urgency softened but never disappeared. Lights flickered on in offices and barracks. Generators hummed. Somewhere, laughter drifted from a group that hadn't yet learned how fragile routine could be. She kept her head level, her pace even. No one stopped her. No one saluted. That was intentional. Recognition created questions, and questions created trails. She learned long ago how to move through places without leaving one behind. Still, she felt it, that quiet sense of being seen without being known. Debrief would come later. It always did. A windowless room, a small table, voices measured and careful as if volume alone could compromise something. For now, she was expected to disappear back into the structure of the base, to become unremarkable again. That was the hardest part. As she walked, fragments of the mission replayed themselves in unwanted clarity. The way the vehicles had braked, the second too long before the third one turned away, the injured soldier's uneven gait as he reached the extraction point. Each image pressed forward, asking to be examined. She didn't push them away. Suppression only gave memories sharper edges later. Instead, she let them pass through her mind like weather, acknowledged, then released. Near the perimeter road, she slowed. Checkpoint 7. The same gate, the same booth, red lights blinking in their patient, mechanical rhythm. It looked smaller now, stripped of the authority it had worn earlier, not because it was weaker, but because she understood it better. The officer was there. Different posture this time, straighter, more alert. When he saw her approaching, something in his expression shifted, not fear, not awe, recognition. He stepped forward before protocol demanded it, scanned her badge without comment. The gate responded instantly, hydraulics engaging with smooth precision. As she passed, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I was wrong." She stopped. Just for a moment. She turned, meeting his eyes fully this time. Up close, he looked tired. Not from the shift, from the realization that certainty could fail you when you relied on it too heavily. "You did your job," she said. Her voice was even, honest. "You just stopped too early." He nodded, absorbing that. There was no defense in him now, no embarrassment either, just learning. That mattered. She continued through the gate, the sound of it closing behind her softer than she remembered. Inside, the base felt different, or maybe she did. She made her way toward the administrative wing, knowing what waited there. The debrief wouldn't be dramatic. It never was, just questions, timelines, decisions examined without judgment, only consequence. In the small room, a handful of people waited. No uniforms on display, no insignia, just professionals who understood the cost of asking someone to recount moments that never fully left you. They didn't praise her. They didn't apologize for what she'd been asked to do. They listened. She answered carefully, precisely. No embellishment, no emotional framing. Facts mattered here. Feelings were processed elsewhere alone. When it was over, one of them spoke. "You made the right calls." She nodded once, not because she agreed, but because she accepted that the analysis was complete. Right and wrong were luxuries for later. Survival was the metric now. Released from the room, she stepped back into the evening air. The sky had deepened into something softer, stars just beginning to push through the fading light. She sat on a low concrete barrier near the edge of the tarmac, shoulders finally relaxing. This was the moment she allowed herself, the brief pause between obligation and solitude. Pride surfaced, uninvited, not loud, not boastful, just a quiet acknowledgement that she had done what she'd been trained to do under pressure without losing herself entirely. It didn't stay long. Broken wasn't the right word for how she felt. Bent, maybe. Like metal shaped under heat and force into something stronger, but forever changed from what it had been. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from a contact that existed only under certain conditions. One line, no context. "Stand by." She closed her eyes. Being hopeful was dangerous in this line of work. Hope tempted you to imagine an ending. There rarely was one. Still, as she stood and headed back toward the shadows of the base, she felt something close to it stir anyway. Because despite everything, the silence, the judgment, the weight of unseen decisions, she was still here. Still trusted. Still moving forward. And that, she knew, was its own kind of redemption. Why did the quiet that followed feel like an ending she wasn't allowed to have? The base slept lightly, the way places built for vigilance always did. Even at night there was motion, slow convoys easing along service roads, distant aircraft cycling through their routines, radios murmuring to themselves like half-remembered dreams. She moved through it all without drawing attention, guided by habit more than thought. "Stand by." The message lingered in her mind as she walked, 2 words that meant nothing to anyone else, 2 words that had shaped years of her life. They were never followed by explanations, only by time. She reached the small quarters assigned to her, temporary, unremarkable, deliberately forgettable. Inside, she set her jacket down with care, as if sudden movement might disturb something fragile. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and finally let her shoulders sag. This was the moment most people imagine when they thought of rest. The mission complete, the danger past, the hero alone with her thoughts. Reality was quieter. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers still, nails short and clean. Hands that had held controls, made choices, ended threats, saved lives. Hands that now felt oddly distant, as if they belonged to someone she only borrowed when necessary. She stared at the wall across from her, unadorned and faintly cracked, and waited for something to happen. Relief, satisfaction, even grief. None of it came. Instead, memory drifted in, uninvited but familiar. The checkpoint again, as it always did. The laugh, the dismissal, the ease with which someone had decided she didn't belong. She wondered briefly how many people walked through their lives like that officer had that morning, confident, competent, unaware of how thin the ground beneath certainty really was. She wondered how many had never had it tested. Her phone buzzed again. A location, a time. No signature. She stood immediately. Habit, readiness, whatever quiet reflection she'd been approaching dissolved back into purpose. She changed quickly, movements efficient, erasing signs that anyone had been there longer than required. The walk to the administrative annex was short. Inside, lights were dimmed, the corridors nearly empty. The door she stopped at looked like every other, plain, unmarked, forgettable by design. It opened before she knocked. Inside, a man sat at the table, older than her, older than most people she worked with. His hair was more gray than not, his posture relaxed in a way that came only from years of knowing when tension was useful and when it was wasteful. He didn't stand, didn't salute. He simply looked at her and nodded. "Sit," he said. She did. For a moment neither of them spoke. Silence again, but this one was different, not tense, not heavy, just honest. "You did well," he said eventually. She nodded. The words landed but lightly. Praise never stuck the way criticism did. "There was discussion," he continued, "about the checkpoint." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not defensively, reflexively. "They want to make sure it doesn't happen again." "They won't," she said, not arrogant, certain. He studied her for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "No," he agreed, "they won't." He slid a folder across the table, thin, deceptively so. "Your status is changing," he said. She didn't open it yet. She'd learned patience early. "Not a promotion," he added, as if reading her thoughts. "Something else." "Visibility," she said quietly. "Yes." The words settled between them. Visibility meant acknowledgement. It meant fewer doors closed, but also fewer shadows to stand in. She weighed it carefully. She always did. "Do I have a choice?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. "You'll still operate," he said finally. "Still choose when it matters, but people will know you exist." She thought of the young soldiers at the checkpoint, of the way some of them had straightened without knowing why, of the officer's apology, of the training memo that would circulate quietly, changing behavior without naming cause. She thought of the team she'd covered, of the way they'd trusted a voice they couldn't see. "I don't want a symbol," she said. "I want competence." He nodded. "That's why we're having this conversation." She opened the folder then, read quickly, absorbed faster. When she looked up, something like resolve had settled into place. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "No stories," she said. "No speeches, no explanations." A pause. Then agreed. The meeting ended the way it had begun, without ceremony. She left the room and stepped back into the night, the air cooler now, the bass quieter still. As she walked, she felt something shift, not relief, not excitement, acceptance. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Tomorrow." She stopped beneath a floodlight, letting its harsh glow wash over her. For a brief second, She allowed herself to feel it all at once, the weight of what she carried, the cost of being trusted, the strange loneliness of standing between systems and consequences. She wasn't proud of it. She wasn't ashamed either. The next morning came early. It always did. At checkpoint 7, the officer stood straighter than before. New signage had gone up overnight, procedures adjusted, language softened in places it hadn't been before. Verify before dismissal. She approached without hesitation, same badge, same calm. This time there was no laughter. The officer scanned the credential, then looked at her, not as a challenge, not as a curiosity, but as a reminder. He stepped aside immediately, motioning her through. "Ma'am," he said. The word was simple, correct. She nodded once and passed through the gate, the hydraulics engaging smoothly behind her. No systems failed. No radios went silent. That was the point. Inside the perimeter, life continued. Trucks rolled. Soldiers trained. Missions planned themselves into existence. She disappeared into it all as she always had, moving toward whatever waited next. There would be other checkpoints, other assumptions, other moments when silence did more than noise ever could. She would meet them the same way. Standing still, saying nothing, letting dignity do the work. Because sometimes authority doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't even explain. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.